Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Power Hour podcast. Today, we're joined by Louise Archer, who is founder and coach of Retrain Search. And this episode is going to be all about winning and delivering retained work. Thank you very much for joining us, Louise.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jeff. It is a pleasure to be here. So most people say what you say, which is, I've seen you a lot. In fact, somebody sent a message to me on LinkedIn saying, I think I've seen you more often than my wife recently, which I was really embarrassed about.
That's a really, really, really attractive way to work, I would say. That's my evaluation of it. And I don't know if it's because you're very, very good at selling it, or it's...
I was in contingent recruitment for a long time. I didn't know that there was another way. I didn't know there was an alternative. I didn't know that it could be different. I just accepted being messed about by clients and working on positions that didn't result in a fee. And
that as well, the more you know about the process, the easier it is to sell the process,
I thought that working senior work was going to be more difficult, but it wasn't. It was the opposite. People are more pleasant, they're easier to deal with, they're more decisive, they respect you more. Yes, they take more time with decision making, but it's firmer once they've made it. You get less dropouts, you get less people messing you about. It's lovely work, and that just happened naturally as a byproduct of providing a retained solution to my clients.
Sold. I'll do it. For sure I'll do it. Because the thing is that is such a higher level of service than what they would be getting from a contingent. And I've got to be honest and say that I do retain search. My retained search is nowhere near as good as what you just set out. Post this, it's going to be much better, I'm sure. And obviously, me having you on, that's like, a great part of being the person who's the other end of this podcast is I'm just learning so much on every single episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Power Hour podcast. Today, we're joined by Louise Archer, who is founder and coach of Retrain Search. And this episode is going to be all about winning and delivering retained work. Thank you very much for joining us, Louise.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jeff. It is a pleasure to be here.
Well, I've seen your videos a lot on LinkedIn, and I love that. I think that's so good because I think that, especially for recruiters, you have to see things 20 times for it actually to even get any kind of headspace, because you've got so much going on all the time, so even sometimes I will say, for instance, I've got a particular client I want to get in with, or a candidate, and I'll ring them to the point where I feel like, am I harassing this person? When they actually answer the phone, are they going to tell me to F off? But very, very often they're actually quite happy. I call it professional persistence now.
That's exactly what I call it, yeah.
Because stalking don't go down as well, it's not really a good term. Yeah. So them videos, they must obviously be successful, or you want to continue to do them, right?
Well, yeah, I guess most people say what you say, which is, I've seen you a lot. In fact, somebody sent a message to me on LinkedIn saying, I think I've seen you more often than my wife recently, which I was really embarrassed about. And I always am a bit embarrassed because they say, I've seen you a lot, and I think, oh God, I'm so sorry. I always apologise. And they always say, no, don't apologise. It's good. It just prompts me to think, yeah, I really need to bloody talk to her. And then eventually they do. So yeah, it does work, I think. Maybe some people get fed up with it and they say, yeah, I've had enough of seeing this. So we go, okay, no probs. We'll take you off it so you don't have to see it anymore. That's okay, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think, especially because retained is something that a lot of people want to do, but it's easier to just stay with your comfort zone. So you kind of need to kind of chip away at people and approach it in different ways and say, did you know it isn't actually that difficult? And look at this person here, this person's just moved. If you want to, you can, don't be making excuses. And so I find that just gradually starts to encourage people to think, actually, do you know what? I'm fed up with being messed about by clients, and actually I'm going to look and see what this is all about. And that's the mission.
So, that's your mission, obviously, right? So this is the reason why we wanted you on, because I feel like from what I've seen, there's no one who's more prominent in this space, right? So we're the tagline of series one is ask an expert, and we've been really lucky actually, because we've actually got a bona fide expert in each pillar. And so the idea of the podcast is that if you look at someone's job, like from a recruitment perspective, my job on a day-to-day basis, I'll need to do some kind of social media. We had Sean Anderson for that. I'll need to send loads of emails. We had Will Aitken for that. I need to avoid getting turned over by clients, and I also need to negotiate terms. We had Barry Cullen who discussed that, and retained is something that I feel like every recruiter should at least have in their locker, and be able to offer that, especially obviously if you're doing perm, and and now we're blessed to have you. So I think that you're very welcome. Thank you for being on. So I think that the idea again is to try and persuade people to adopt these tactics. And there's no point Sean being on if we're not going to adopt what he says. There's no point Will being on, etc. Right? So I think that this part here could be maybe, if you wouldn't mind, to actually explain to us why are you so hell bent on getting people to do retained work?
That's a good word. That's a good way of describing it. Hell bent is is probably accurate. Because when I was in contingent recruitment for a long time, and I didn't know that there was another way. I didn't know there was an alternative. I didn't know that it could be different. I just accepted being messed about by clients and working on positions that didn't result in a fee, and sometimes things going swimmingly and smoothly, and getting to the end and getting the fee and being happy, but quite often being frustrated by people not coming back to me. And I think the better and better that I got at what I was doing, just through experience, as you do, the more frustrating that started to get. And I actually got to the stage where I was getting to be pretty much done with it. I was that frustrated with spending so much time on things that, for whatever reason, because they've changed the requirements or pulled a job or whatever else, didn't result in revenue. And I always thought that retained was for very senior and executive positions. I didn't know that it could be done at the level that I was working at, which wasn't particularly senior. I was sort of between the 40 to 120 was about the top, and I wasn't doing much of that really. The majority of it was 60, 70K type stuff. And even below that, I just didn't know that retained was possible. And so when someone taught me how to do it and the principles behind it, and then showed me, like, this is how it's done, I was like, can I swear, Jeff, or is that not done?
No, yeah, well, I can't help swearing, so you are very welcome to swear.
I don't want you to I'll be good.
No, swear as much as you want. You've got to be yourself.
I guess in polite terms, I guess I thought, why on earth had nobody told me about this and how to do this before, and why aren't more people doing it? Because not only did it change everything for me from my work perspective, it enabled me to work with clients that were committed and not spend time on stuff which was flaky and unpredictable, but it allowed me to do my job properly, better than I ever have done before, and enjoy it more, and give the candidate a better experience and give the client a better experience. And I looked around at all the peers I had in the very big firm I was working for at the time, and I looked around at my peers outside at different firms and heard them all complaining and getting pissed off with clients and getting pissed off with fees falling out, and like, why aren't more people doing this? I just don't understand. And I guess I've only ended up doing what I'm doing now because I can't see anybody else. I can't see anybody else showing anyone the way that, is kind of, I mean, we'd had training. I'd had like 2 or 3 sets of training on how to win retainers. I'd had training at Hudson on how to win retainers. I had training at Air on how to win retainers. I'd had training at NES on how to win retainers. But they were people kind of coming in and saying, right, you need to value your time, or you need to explain to the client that, it doesn't work like that and you need to be paid. And it just didn't work. like all of the people that would go out of that room and we'd go, right, yeah, I'm going to go and do that. And then clients would go, no, I'm not doing that. And we'd go, oh, sorry. Okay, fine, no problem. We'll have it contingent. And it just didn't work. Whereas the way that I got taught, it did work. And so I looked around and was like, why is nobody doing it? And I still don't really know, but I guess I've just fallen into doing it ever since, because I'm really passionate about people being able to see that there is a different way. I don't want to say it's better, because some people really like contingent work and they like working on that basis, and that's cool. Like, if you like doing that, stick with it. You know, I don't want to suggest that you should change if you don't want to, or if you're quite happy with it. But what I really am passionate about is if that is frustrating for you, and if you do get annoyed with the fact you can't do your job properly because you keep getting messed about and you have to juggle your time across lots and lots of different jobs because you never quite know which one's going to come in, and you'd actually rather work in a partnership with a client that's committed to make sure that you can deliver the best result, then you can. You can. There is a way of doing it, and it isn't that difficult. So I mean, in terms of like what it changes, it just changed me. And people say to me now, like, it changes them as a person. It changed me as a person because it made me a better parent. It gave me more time to have my kids, and I was a single parent at the time. And it gave me more comfort and security in my revenue and my earnings. So I was more content internally. And that just comes out in every part of your life. That confidence and assurance, and you get better and better at what you're doing because you're able to hone and fine tune your skills in sales and delivery with committed clients in partnership, and it starts to really raise your game. And I experienced that as I started to do more and more work on this basis. The level that I was working at just naturally started to increase, and I started to go up the value chain. And there, oh my God, it was like a breath of fresh air. It's like, I thought that working senior work was going to be more difficult, but it wasn't. Like, it was the opposite. People are more pleasant, they're easier to deal with, they're more decisive, they respect you more. Yes, they take more time with decision making, but it's firmer once they've made it. You get less dropouts, you get less people messing you about. It's lovely work. And that just happened naturally as a byproduct of providing a retained solution to my clients.
So there's quite a strong why there, really, isn't there? That's a really, yeah. I mean, that hit multiple different sort of levels there. So, like, you talked about your time being more valuable, obviously being a parent, making sure that you can monetize your time in a more sort of structured way, knowing what you're going to get, etc. It's helped you to increase the level that you've been operating at in regards to like the service level. You mentioned that it helped you to be better at your job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is as well is that my experience of dealing with a lot more senior individuals is the same as what you've just said there. It's, I mean, I actually like working across spectrum. I genuinely do, because I'm quite lucky, really. I'm in an extremely candidate-driven market, and we've got quite a good resource function in our business. So we actually, I get a good choice of who I'm going to get to represent. So that's really, really good for me, because I'm in a really candidate-driven market, and I've set things up where I can represent the good candidates that I like to. And so for me, I can get a really good candidate who's got 6 months experience, or I can get someone who's got 16 years experience, but I always work on an individual basis. But that being said, the process usually does go smoother, albeit a little bit longer, and I've got less worry when I'm dealing with people who are more experienced higher up the food chain as well. And so something that you were saying there about, you had multiple different training sessions from multiple different trainers at multiple different businesses, but they didn't work, right? So how would you say is the best way? How would you say is the best way to pitch a retainer?
Yeah. Great question. And it was different to what I had been taught before. The way that I learned from a guy that I credit regularly, a guy called Matt Howell, and I love him to pieces, and always will, for showing me how to do it, is that retained is a solution. First off, not as you start to get better at it, but it remains that, but it starts to evolve and develop into other things as you get better at it. But to begin with, retained works beautifully as a solution to the problems that the contingent model doesn't solve. Does that make sense?
So you've got to find someone who's got that gap.
So basically, in the same way that I just said to you, if the contingent model, if you're enjoying working on that basis and it's working for you, like, don't do anything differently, just carry on doing what you're doing. Yeah. If it isn't, then there is a different way of working. It's exactly the same. So what I like to do first, and the most effective way to do it, is just to diagnose that with the client first. Like, how do you go about talent acquisition, right? How do you find out from the client how they go about it? Let's say they're using agencies, because that's generally why we're having a conversation with them. That is that they're using agencies. How is it going? Like, do they get what they want when they want it? Is it an enjoyable process? Is what they're doing at the moment working for them beautifully? Because if it is, there's no point you suggesting that they should do something different. And why should they? It doesn't make any sense. There's no motivation for them to change. However, what I found is that, as well as it being a frustrating model for us to try and deliver a good service against, it's actually incredibly frustrating from a hiring perspective on the client side too. And when you ask a client, are you getting what you want when you want it? Is it an enjoyable process? A lot of the time they look at you like you've gone a bit strange, like, no. Sometimes they don't say no. They're just like, well, God, I mean, it's recruitment, isn't it?
And that's such a clever way of saying it. Is it enjoying the process?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've never said that before. Sorry.
When you dive into it and you find out, like, well, tell me about the last, few hires that you've made. What methods have you used? How has it gone? Did you get what you wanted when you wanted it? And was it an enjoyable process? And they start to tell you about, sometimes you get a hit and sometimes you don't. Like, it's hit and miss. And we're kind of accepting of that and think, oh, well, that's okay. That's just contingent recruitment, right? But when you put it in the context of any other business service, or any other service to that matter, it's absolutely diabolical. Like, I've just had my patio done, for example. Imagine asking someone to build me a patio and not knowing whether I was going to end up with a patio at the end of it. And just going, well, hopefully I will. And that's what we do. That's what we do when we instruct a contingent agent to carry out a piece of work for us. Hopefully we'll get a result, but we don't really know. But clients have just kind of got into the habit of just having to accept that, because that's just the only way. That's just the only way, especially at lower levels. Nobody ever gives them an alternative that's viable or credible or got any kind of compelling logic to it. So they've just become used to this model that is, well, actually, by definition, by chance. The definition of contingent means by chance, right? So if they're having a good time with that model and it's getting them what they want when they want it, it's enjoyable process, it doesn't matter. Carry on, tell them to carry on doing what they're doing, because so few people are. Like, stick with it. But if they're not, and they're not getting the quality, or the quantity isn't where they want it, or the candidates keep declining offers, or they just need more CVs and people have just kind of dried up, whatever the problem is, then it doesn't make sense for you to then suggest that you do the same thing again. It doesn't make sense. So that's why in those situations, it makes sense to explain, actually, in these situations, we work in a different way. Because if it's low level, if it's easy to fill, if it's straightforward, that contingent model often works just fine. Like, just keep using that in those situations where it works well, just keep doing it. A lot of low level stuff, forklift drivers, envelope stuffers, things like that. You can just bang an advert on, filter the response, ping the CVs over, boom, hire's done. You don't need to use a complex or a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. But there are lots of situations, if it's niche, if it's time sensitive, it's really urgent, or if it's a difficult location, or if it's a brand that people aren't, don't really know or aren't a big fan of in the market, for all types of reasons, it starts to get a bit more complex. It starts to get a bit more difficult. And those are the positions that go lower down a contingent recruiter's list of priorities. And so they really struggle to justify spending time on if they don't get a hit first time. And that's where the clients start to experience this pain of not getting what they want, or not getting it when they want it, or not having a particularly enjoyable process. And so for those situations, I then explain, in those situations, that's why we take a different approach. And some financial commitment from you enables me to put a robust process in place, and importantly, to commit to making sure that we reach a result. And so I'd like to carry out a retained exercise on this project and show you how effective this way of working is. And I'll talk them through a process of what I want to do and how it's going to work and why. And once they understand that you're not just looking for the retainer, you don't just want the deposit and then you're going to run away with it, because that's what most of them are frightened of, right? I mean, there's all sorts of easy ways of overcoming it. Like, well, it doesn't make sense for me to cut my fees by 2/3. Why? It's not commercially viable for me to do that. I need the full fee to be profitable. That's that's why I want to do this with you, right? And once they understand that, and then you put in place measures to make sure that they feel comfortable with it, they will try it. They will try it, especially where they're pissed off or it's not working with what they're doing right now, because they don't have any other options. And that's the easiest place and the easiest way of starting to win your first retained projects.
And so that means that you don't actually have to have a trading, because a lot of people that I speak to, and I say to them, have you thought about doing retained? I'm nowhere near as much of an advocate as what you are, of course, but it's something that I would suggest to speak to, and they'll say to me, well, I have got this one client who I've done loads of business with, who I reckon would retain me. But what you're saying is that actually it's the other way around. It's you're going to be more successful by identifying somebody who's got a problem that contingent solutions have not solved, and then offering them an alternative.
That's the instance that that's a very easy instance to do it in. The other is also true. If you have a client that's really committed to you, that loves the work that you're doing, that is very happy with the service that you're delivering, it's also easy to convert them. The challenge that people find under that circumstance is the clients tend to say, but I just like the way it's working at the moment. I don't want to change anything. I don't need a better service. I don't need any more from you. I just want you to carry on doing. So that's where people tend to struggle a little bit, because what they don't want to do is say, well, I'm not working with you then. They don't want to say, I'm walking away then if you won't retain me, because this is a good client. So it is a bit different when you're converting a client. That's really good. And there's ways of winning retain work in all sorts of situations. In that situation, it would be slightly different. And shall I talk through how I would do that?
Yeah, if you're happy.
Yeah, happy to.
I'm going to ask you as many questions as what you're.
I'll just keep answering them. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
In that situation, what I would do is to, first establish that they are happy with what you're doing, because I have been a bit bitten by that before. I've been out with a consultant, and we went in who she identified as a client that was a very good client of hers and was happy with the work that we were doing. And we launched into explaining what we wanted to do and why. And they said, but we weren't happy with the timelines on the last 7 projects. We weren't happy with the quality of the candidates. 2 of them have already left. And she wasn't in the strong position that she thought she was. So yeah, that was a lesson learned. And I'm a big believer that every situation, you learn through stuff like that, don't you? And so what the first and the most important thing to do is just establish, are they happy with the service that you're providing at the moment, right? Take time to just have a review. Let's just talk about the last 12 months. This time of year is perfect to do that. Let's just talk over these 12 months that have gone. Have you been happy with what we've done? Are you happy with the quality, the quantity? Are we giving you what you want when you want it? Is it an enjoyable process? Same sorts of questions. If you get a yeah, absolutely, fucking brilliant, carry on doing it. We just want you to keep doing what you're doing into next year. Great. Then the problem isn't on the client side that you want to be solving, it's yours. And often the consultants that want to work retained are those that would like the commitment from their client in order for them to be able to keep doing what they're doing. And that's it. It's as simple as that. I really like working with you. I'm glad that you've said that you're happy with what I'm doing, because I love doing what I'm doing for you. And I'd like to carry on doing what we're doing together over the next 12 months and deliver, an even better experience for you. But I've got a problem. And that problem is that the market isn't getting any easier. Like every time we go to market at the moment, it gets harder and harder to find the people that we need to find. often it's talent short markets, these niche skill sets that we're brought in to find, we're brought in for a reason, right? Or these awkward locations, and particularly with the way the economic climate is at the moment, people are a bit more nervous and they want to just sit tight for another quarter and see what happens, and then I might look at it next quarter. It's taking us longer and longer each time that we take on a piece of work to reach a result. And the problem is, at the moment, I'm working totally at risk. And I would explain that to the client. At any point through any of the work that we do, you can just say, actually, do you know what? Thanks so much for your work on that, Lou, but we've just decided we're going to go a different direction with that one. So can you just put a pin in it? Or, yeah, we had someone internally put their hand up for it. So I know you've done loads of work. We're really grateful for the work you've done, but we're just going to look at this option instead. And actually, you'll find, if this is a client you've worked with for a while, there's probably 2 or 3 instances that you can actually cite and say, do you remember we did that piece of work then, and this and this and this happened? And then you just said, actually, like, I'm screwed. And I can't, the problem is I can't keep putting the amount of time that I'm needing to put in every time we go to market, because I'm just completely at risk. It's not commercially viable for me to keep putting myself in that position. So what I'm not saying is that this isn't an exercise to make more money. I'm not suggesting that there should be any more money involved at all. That's not what this is about. All it is I'm going to need some financial commitment from you at the beginning of a project to make sure that I can carry on delivering the service that you've come accustomed to from me. And then I would talk them through how it works and say, we don't need to do it on everything right now. Let me just show you on this one project. If you're happy with what we're doing, we'll then carry on. And if you're not, we don't have to do it again.
Yeah, because you just answered the question that I was thinking. I would imagine that you've just overcome the objection that most consultants would say to you, is that sounds like a risky conversation and it could go the other way and you've lost a client. But like what you've just ended that on, is, if we'll just try it once, and if you don't like it, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, they don't need to marry you. Like, this is let's just do one, and let's just let me show you that not only am I not going to run away with your retainer, because, as I said, I don't want to cut my fees by 2/3. It's just that it isn't commercially viable for me either. But I'm actually going to deliver an even cleaner process than you've been used to, and a candidate that's had a better experience because it's been done in this way.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the next step from there, let's just say, for instance, they said to you, okay, look, I'm interested to have a look at this. What would you do next?
From the sales perspective, to get it over the line, or what would?
From a sales perspective. So I imagine you put together some kind of an SLA, or
So what I would say to that is, I'd say, fantastic. I'm so excited to be working with you in this way. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go away and I'm going to put a proposal together of how it's going to work, and just outline everything that we've covered today, and of course the commercial proposition, the cost that we've just talked through. When are you free for me to walk you through that? And then we can kick the project off once we're all comfortable and agreed. And who else needs to be on that call that's going to need to have questions answered as well? Your legal team or your managing director, or who else needs to be through the sign-off process? And I'd book the next meeting in to talk them through the agreement and how it's going to work. If I can, I'll tie the briefing meeting into that and move straight into briefing. But sometimes that's a little bit longer winded than, a quick 10-minute run through of an agreement, and actually they have questions and you want to be overcoming all those. And then, okay, we need this person in place by January. It's already November. We need 2 weeks for our research phase, 2 weeks for your interviews, and a month's notice. So we need to get started now. So can we put the briefing meeting for Monday to kick it off and get it launched? So I'd go from this meeting to a proposal, just agreement meeting, to a briefing meeting.
Okay. So it's a simple process. And obviously the veteran question that you asked there is, like, is there anyone else that needs to be included in this? Because that's such an annoying thing that, you go through a book sometimes, and then you've pitched the wrong people, or there needs to be a third or fourth. You've forward thought that for sure. Yeah.
Well, almost, is there anyone else, but not quite. Like, the devil, as they say, is in the detail. The most effective way to ask it is, who else needs to be on that call? Like, there's always someone else, as you and I both know. There's always someone else, and the trick is to assume that from the beginning. and ask who else needs to be on that call so that we can answer their questions that they're inevitably going to have, and make sure that everybody that needs to be is on that next call.
Okay, so I'm confident now that I understand the process on like a high level, right, on the sales side of things. So number one is obviously don't try and sell to people that don't need your services.
No.
However, like spend more time on identifying people that this solution can help, right? So that's sort of like number one. Then number two, obviously we've got another route of dealing with people that you already dealt with, and the way you would do that is review what's gone on, make sure they're happy first, and then so long as they're happy, explain to them your problem, that you're at risk, right?
Yeah.
Give them a solution to that problem, explain to them this is not forever, we can do it one at a time. If anytime you're unhappy, we can revert, but I'm sure that you won't be, because I'm going to be more dedicated to you, and your service level is most probably going to increase. So we've got existing strategy for existing clients, new client strategy, right? And you've also spoke about what the call would look like and the process of, now you go away, you work out how long it's going to take to fill that role, you put something together, you have that conversation with them, you get whoever else needs to be on that conversation, and then you do a briefing, and the end of the briefing is pay me the money and let me start, basically, right?
Almost. You are getting the agreement from the commercial perspective and the process, and how it's all going to work. And then you book the briefing meeting in. And in the briefing meeting, all of the people that are going to be involved in the process from beginning to end, anyone that's going to interview, anyone that's going to test them, anyone that's going to have a say in any part of this needs to be on that briefing call. And that briefing call is the secret, well, one of the secrets to getting the delivery of the project right. So I wouldn't sort of go and start. The start of the project is the briefing session, in which we'll define the parameters of the search and the process that we're going to follow. But that's separate from the agreement of how we're going to do it. We'll agree the legalities, the commercials, the overriding timelines that we're working to, and then we'll kick it off. But the first stage is the briefing call, and that's when we go through. Shall I carry on?
Yes, please.
And that's when we'll go through. We'll start with the role itself. So the what are they looking for someone to do, and we'll clarify, as you would as a contingent recruiter, but in more detail from a functional and behavioural perspective. What does someone actually need to be able to do this job? What are the functional competencies? Behaviourally, what behaviours do they need to display, and define the actual scope of a short listable candidate. What exactly are we looking for? And I will also make sure that I put together a framework of assessment against those competencies. It might sound like we're going into too much detail, but the reason that this bit is important is what I've learned through years and years and years of working on a retained basis now, since I was lucky enough to learn how to do it, is that the retainer itself doesn't actually solve a lot of the problems that can crop up through a search. Having the financial commitment means you've got client buy-in, happy days. It doesn't stop them from not answering your emails for a week. It doesn't stop them from considering somebody internally and starting to skew it doesn't stop them from introducing somebody else partway through and going, actually, we're going to have this person interview. It doesn't stop them from looking at a candidate and going, yeah, that's not quite what we want. Actually, I think we've decided we want this. So all of those problems that can crop up need to be mitigated against, and the starting point for mitigating against them is in the briefing session. So things like defining what the scope of the search is, and actually agreeing between all of the stakeholders, these are the essential criteria, these are the desirable criteria from a functional behavioural competency perspective, and then going on to define all of the other things like the geography for the search, where are we looking, or the target companies, because there needs to be some parameters. If there's thousands of candidates, then we're not just going to search the world forever and ever and ever. We're going to search a specific geography or a specific number of target companies. And equally, if there are very few, and our initial research suggests that it's a very small talent pool, which of the parameters are they willing to flex in order to make sure that we identify enough through the search to be certain that we're going to be reaching a good number on the shortlist. We'll agree any off limits, any people or companies that they don't want us to approach or poach from. We'll agree the timelines, the interview process. We'll agree the data that they want us to collect through the search, whether that's salary data, compensation, benefits data, bonuses, even things like perception of their brand in the market. Do they want us to find out how they are perceived among this talent pool, and why? Do they want us to find out? Shall I carry on?
Yeah, always, please.
Do they want us to find out who the employers of choice are in this market and why they're the employers of choice? Because all this sort of data, it doesn't cost us anything to gather, and it's easy to gather because we're talking to these people, right? It's live, accurate, bang up to date, right from the horse's mouth, right? There's no better way to feed into a client's employee value proposition than this data. So every time, if you're doing this with your client every time, and this is the stuff that it's game changing for small businesses that are growing, that will feed in and make them stronger and stronger. Every time they do a search, they get stronger. So every time they go to market, they're in a better and better position because they know how to position themselves with this talent pool. So all that sort of stuff gets agreed, and then booked in. We book in steering calls with the client. So every week there's a steering call that they must attend. It's obligatory. And again, all of these things are in here because there are things that can go wrong. And I know because I've done enough searches to know what can go wrong. So I know that if I'm not showing my client what I'm doing every week, there's a very, very high risk that I'm going to get to the end of the search and them go, yeah, that's just not what we were looking for. Or that's just not good enough. Or I just want to see some more candidates. Whereas if I'm transparent in my search and I show my client where I'm going, who I'm identifying, who I'm approaching, who I'm discussing the position with, what they've said, whether they're interested, whether they're not interested, and importantly, that we have the opportunity to re-steer that search if we don't find what we're looking for together collectively. One of our senior experts in our mastermind group put it beautifully not long ago at one of the events and said, when you work like this together in partnership with your client, there's a Buddhist saying, I don't know what the saying is in Buddhist, but you basically both become slaves to the problem. So the problem isn't yours that the client is wanting you to solve. You work together on it. Here's our problem. Here is the talent pool. Here's all the people I've approached. Here's all the people that have said no. Here's why they've said no. What shall we do? We together collectively. And that way, by the end of the project, by the end of the 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the level of the position that you're the search you're executing, when you reach the long list of candidates who I call QIA, that I learned from a very, very well-esteemed, excellent professional research firm, qualified against the criteria, interested in the opportunity, and assessed against the brief, both functionally and behaviourally. When you reach that long list of candidates, however long that is, the client knows without a shadow of a doubt that they are making their choice from all of the best candidates that are available to them in the market at this time, even if it isn't what they set out to find. Even if it falls short of their ideal, they are certain it is the best that's available to them. And it's those that will then choose from and take forward to interview.
I'm sold. I'll do it. For sure, I'll do it. Because the thing is that is such a higher level of service than what they would be getting from a contingent. And I've got to be honest and say that I do retain search. My retained search is nowhere near as good as what you've just set out. Post this, it's going to be much better, I'm sure. And obviously, me having you on, that's like, you know, a great part of being the person who's the other end of this podcast is I'm just learning so much on every single episode. But yeah, I think that as well, the more you know about the process, the easier it is to sell the process, I think, you know, because these kinds of things, we're talking about how to pitch, and this was now the briefing, and you're setting everything. So really, you're setting yourself up to succeed rather than, and I think as well, from like fitting on the other side of the fence to that, thinking about, I've got a business myself. I like to hire people that are going to be good at what they're doing. Sometimes before you pull the trigger, there is that moment where you think to yourself, is this person the actual best person for this job? If I put a little bit more time and effort in at the beginning, will my life be easier throughout employment of whoever that person is, and you're eradicating that fear, aren't you? And I think that, at the beginning when you was talking, I was thinking to myself, how are you going to get these people to trust you enough to give you a retainer if you've never spoken to them before? And by the end of this like segment, I would say that even if I'd never spoken to you before, I'm now looking at things like, this is actually going to be a completely different level. I'm going to get value, not just by getting a person delivered to me, but I'm going to be able to have an idea of what the perception of my brand is like. I'm going to have ideas of how to improve that. I'm going to make my hiring process more stable. Because, a lot of the time as well, like what you mentioned, and it was a question I had in my mind, but again, you've answered it without me having to ask it, is that a lot of the time when you're speaking to clients that are having problems hiring, it's because their processes are shit. They're people that have already got work in there and not invested enough to fill the role. Their brand is terrible. They're in the middle of nowhere. These kinds of problems that a contingent consultant will look at and think, like, for want of a better word, fuck that. I don't really want to do it. Like, you want people that are in the middle of central London that everyone loves already, and you've only just got to go on the phone, would you like that company? And they go, oh yeah, I love that firm. When you're a contingent consultant, you want to, someone had taught me something a long time ago. They said to me, especially when you're in a candidate driven market, you've got to get the candidates. Of course you've got to get the candidates, because otherwise, if you're in a candidate driven market and you ain't got no candidates, you're not making no money. But equally as important, you have to show them a great company. There's no point having a really good jockey and putting them on a crap horse, right? Yeah. So, it's from a contingent perspective, you're looking at things from a different, viewpoint. It's like, have you already got these things in place, Mr. or Mrs. Client? And if you have, like what you mentioned, that client's going to naturally rise to the top of your, mindset when you're talking to a good candidate. And if they maybe haven't got those kinds of things, but they're willing to, or even if they're not so much like super willing to change these situations, you've put in a robust process which eliminates these problems from happening, don't they? And I think it's a brilliant it's a brilliant strategy.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah,
certainly better than anything I've had. Sorry,
I think one of the things to remember is when you're working with firms, as you say, that are tier 2, tier 3, sometimes even lower, it is difficult for them to compete with the top tier firms, and those are often the firms that are getting a real rough ride with the contingent model for all the reasons that you just said, because people are like, fuck that, I'm not touching that with a barge pole. Why would you? Where you and what can also happen with firms like that is they have a bit of an inflated view of themselves, and the talent that they think they can attract is not actually the talent that they can attract. And they end up in a spiral of pain because of it, because of both those things. And what many recruiters say to me, but why would I want that on a retained basis? Like that's like a poison chalice for me. I get a retainer and then how the hell am I going to deliver it? And that's because they have the perception that the answer to having a retained, the financial commitment, is that you find their ideal candidate, that's what they're paying you for. And actually that isn't what happens. What happens sometimes, right? Sometimes the financial commitment allows you to find a candidate that you wouldn't have found just because you can spend time on it when you couldn't before. And that sometimes does happen. But more often than not, what actually happens is you drive the project to a result in such a way that the client is confident to hire a candidate that they wouldn't have hired in a contingent process. As a contingent recruiter, how many times do you say to a client, like, fucking hire this person? This is the best you are going to get. Or these 2 people, these 3 people are the best that you're going to get. Just hire them now before they go, because if you don't, I'm screwed. I'm out of here. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell them that this is a good deal and they've got a good option here, they won't bloody listen, and they're still saying, well, I think we just need to get a bit closer to this, or we need a bit more of this experience. And then, like, oh my God, you're done. Like, they won't listen. What you're able to do in a retained process is work with them in such a way that you don't have to say that to them. They can see it. And they see it so clearly as you go through a project that by the end they go, I'm delighted with that. And it's the same fucking candidates.
Mm.
It's the same as the ones that you would probably have ended up with on a contingent basis, but because they've been on the journey with you and they've seen it all. Someone else in our mastermind group is fucking awesome, by the way. If anyone's listening to this, it's fully retained, that wants to join a mastermind for retained consultants, please come talk to me about it. I would really love to. It's so exciting and so cool what we do. Anyway, he said, I've realized that I woke up in the middle of the night and I've realized something. It's like Uber, right? Uber didn't change the time that it takes to get a taxi to you. All they did was give you visibility of the journey.
That's so
and it's
cool.
the same. We're not necessarily changing the outcome, but we're giving you visibility of it to give you the confidence that the outcome is the best outcome that you're going to get, and the confidence to make that decision, and all the evidence to make that decision.
And you can call it confidence, and I can call it trust. Because I think that comes down to everything. I think that if someone trusts you, and because the thing is that if they've been invested, or you've persuaded them to be invested in the process, and you've shown them your work throughout, then it's kind of like you haven't got to trust me as an individual. Because I find that a lot of people that I speak to, because I speak to salespeople all day long. Ultimately, recruiters are salespeople, and so they're really, really good. They're really good at telling me that they bill 20 grand when they bill 18. Do you know what I mean? For instance, right? And and they get me. Sometimes they get me, right? Because you sometimes want them to do 20 and not 18, right? But as an example. But I think that a lot of people, they feel a little bit when they get on the phone to like a sharp talking person, and like what you said about, you ask questions like, who else needs to be on, rather than does anyone else need to be on, and these kinds of questions, right? They know what they're up against. Sometimes they think this person's either highly intelligent or highly trained, or both, right? And so when you're telling them like, look, mate, I'm telling you ain't going to get better than this candidate. They feel like, yeah, snake oil salesperson, I will, in the back of their mind. But as you say, if the proof of the pudding is there, isn't it? And they've been it. So, all right. So that brings us, I think, really nicely to like the second part of being a retained consultant, which is, how do you specifically fulfill a retained assignment? So we're now at the end of the brief. They've said yes. We've set everything out. We've spoken to them about everything that we've covered already.
Taking the brief. Yeah.
And they've agreed, and they've paid for the retainer. The money's there. It's day one. What's the process of fulfilling a retainer?
First is a briefing session, which we've talked about. But then I would go away and I'd carry out the research. It does depend on the level of the position that you're delivering. The way that I would deliver an executive assignment is different to the way I would deliver a 25k telesales position, for the right reasons. Candidates will live in different places, will hang out in different places, will respond to different approaches, will respond to different frequency of approaches, will respond to a different speed of process. The speed of the process for an executive level hire is much longer than a lower level hire, not because you make it seem more expensive, but because you can only take a candidate through a process as quickly as they are comfortable going. And senior candidates are more comfortable to take time. They need to talk to their wives. They need to mull it over. They need to go on holiday several times throughout the process and think about it and all that. Whereas lower level candidates will just go, yeah, fuck it. Cool. I'm going to do it. So yeah, the length of the process varies, but in whatever project I'm executing, the first thing I'm going to do is set myself up my research framework, and it doesn't need to be complicated. A lot of our members use things like Clockwork or Loxo or Ezekiel, specific search software. I know Loxo does well for contingent as well, but that gives the client visibility. So there's access from a client perspective. There's client access to your software. I haven't had that in the last 3 or 4 years that I've been executing search work. I haven't had a CRM. Prior to that, I've used Invenius, Cluen, File Finder, all those types of software. But it's easy enough to just use a spreadsheet. Just use an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll set myself up my research framework, and I'll systematically then carry out my LinkedIn searches. And the best person for LinkedIn searching, in my opinion, hands down, and should be an expert, in my opinion, for you to have on here, is Gabby at Tooled Up Raccoons. Have you heard of Gabby Preston Vipers? Fucking awesome. Okay. So a little shout out to her. Is do my Boolean search strings and interrogate LinkedIn and Google X-ray searching and the Matthew Mercer's your Google X-ray search guy, and find all the candidates and basically go through a phase that we call in researchers identification. Dead simple. So I'd ID all my candidates. You can approach at different time to IDing if you want to. I like to ID and approach at the same time. So I'll ID my candidate and then I'll approach them, but I'll also record everything that I'm doing on my spreadsheet. So I'll record every single candidate that I've looked at that looks to be suitable. Now that's sort of 80% and anything above 80%. So I'll go on the side of caution, because we all know that sometimes what they look like isn't quite what they are. So if they look anywhere near right, I'll ID them, I'll put them on my spreadsheet or put them into my system, and I'll make my first approach to them. My first approach is going to be vague. I'm not going to send any details of the client. I'm certainly not going to talk about salary, and I'm not going to show my cards as to who I'm working for. I'm going to go in with something very flattering and executive searchy sounding, like I have been commissioned to carry out a search for a high profile position, which is the, I don't know, head of engineering for whatever it might be. Or even if it's lower level, I'd say a sales executive for, I did a few telesales positions for a mate who's got a call center in financial services, and you can make it sound, a bit more exciting than it really is. But that they've identified you as a candidate that they would really like to talk to, and they've asked me to approach you. So that kind of really blows smoke up their ass. I've been retained, you've been identified, and I've been specifically asked to approach you. That would be the kind of initial approach that I would make. And I'd do that with everybody. And then I'd take everybody through a 6-stage process, sometimes 7, depending on how fierce or difficult the competition is for candidates, which would involve a LinkedIn message first, and then an email saying something similar, but maybe with a bit more detail, either to their work email, or if I can find their personal email. If I can find their mobile number, I'll get on the phone to them early doors. Even send WhatsApp messages and text messages and have that as part of my process with a similar type message. Microsoft Teams, now you can actually call candidates through Microsoft Teams without a mobile number. Fucking genius.
That is a really good tip.
It is, yeah, it's really good. And so I put together my steps that I'm going to go through, depending on the level of the position and the templates of what I'm going to send them. And I'll go through those stages over, depending on how senior or junior it is, how frequently I'm going to. With a junior position, it'll be every 2 or 3 days. With a more senior position, I'd spread out the approaches a little bit more. But at some point, I will phone them up and cold call them. And if I have to, it's going to be through a switchboard. If I can't get a mobile number, I will call them through their switchboard at work and pose as a supplier or a somebody that's working with them on a project, or maybe guess one of their client names and just try and get in that way, or get a mobile number from the switchboard that way. And I will headhunt every single target, every single candidate identified, even if it's only a 25k position, because often you'll get candidates that way that you just don't get. They won't respond to written approaches. I know it's funny, for years I was in quite prominent sales positions, business development positions, and my phone number was on LinkedIn, my mobile number, and so few people actually rung me. I'd get email after email and LinkedIn message after this position, we really want someone with your skill set in this location, and I just ignore all of them. But the only ones that actually I was interested in and I had a chat with was a really nice opportunity with Philip Morris, internal executive search for Philip Morris at the time. They were going smokeless, and she just rang me up. She didn't even message me on LinkedIn. She rang me up. I went down to London about 3 days later and met her. Didn't even respond to any of the others. And that's why, people say, yeah, but do you really need to? I say, yes, you do fucking need to. And don't have anyone say that people don't like cold calls. They do, especially if they're headhunting calls. Yeah,
if they're relevant and there's some kind of value in it, of course you're going to get people that say, oh, I'm not interested, or I've got the ump that day, or just in general, you get pricks on the train. But that's
fine. Even if they just say, no, I'm not interested, fine. At least that's it. Candidate ruled out. Next. On to the next one.
And I think that's the mentality that gets you okay with cold calling.
Yeah.
Like prospecting, the word is like you're digging, you're going to get a load of muck and then you're going to get the gold kind of thing. And if you but you tell me no, that's cool. That goes red. It's not going to bother you again. The more no's you get, the closer you get to your yes, isn't it? So I'm with you, Jeff. You just keep going through that. So you go through those processes, and then
every week at least you're having a call with your client and you're showing them what you're doing, and you're showing them the candidates that aren't interested, why they're not interested. You're bringing them the data that you're collecting, and if necessary, you're re-steering. I'd only re-steer once. And then
What do you
by
mean
the
by
end of,
re-steering, please?
well, like if, for example, we don't find what we're expecting to find, let's say we get into week 2 and I've only been able to identify 50 or 60 candidates that have the skill set. I know that statistically, I'm probably going to actually be able to get hold of half of them, tops. That means I'm only going to speak to 25 people. I'm probably only going to get 4 or 5 that actually are interested out of that 25. And out of that, probably 2 of them aren't going to be right. So I might end up with only 2 on my long list, and that's not enough. So I know that statistically, I need a bigger scope than that. So the parameters are too tight. So I'll share that with the client and say, this is the situation. Do you want us to carry on as we are, risking us only having, 2 on a short list, or do you want to change the parameters at this stage? What do you want to change? Is it level of experience? Is it this specific skill set? Is it location? Is it salary or level? And I'll allow them to do that once, and then we'll finish the identification and research stage. And then through that, I'll then assess all of the candidates against the criteria that we've agreed in the briefing session, and make sure that they can do the job. So they have got the background and the experience that they can do what they say they can do. And they're interested, and that they meet the basic criteria from a location and qualification perspective. And then I'll sit down with the client and jointly agree which ones they want to take to interview. So I'll collectively, together with the client, and again, all of this is about mitigating the risk of the things that can go wrong. What I've experienced is, if you don't do that, if you don't do that, what can happen is if you present a shortlist, you present the shortlist and the client is surprised by it. And they're like, well, no, this isn't what we wanted, or this isn't good enough. Or if you collectively select the candidates that they want to take to shortlist, what they're effectively doing is agreeing the shortlist themselves. There's no dispute over the shortlist. You've selected the ones you want to take to interview. And so now there's going to be a second stage payment to make at shortlist stage. And then I'll move into the final stage, which is the interview, setting up the interviews. Quite often the client will ask me if I can be on the interviews. I've noticed that more and more as I've got, probably just more and more confident at running processes. And that's nice. It's nice, not because you want to interfere with it, just because you can then provide a sounding board objectively as possible for the client. And some of them aren't particularly good at interviewing, so you can help steer them on the types of questions to ask, and I'll always help them with that. These are the areas that I feel they're strong in, and these are the areas for concern that I think we ought to be probing at second and third stages. And if necessary, support them with behavioural assessment or psychometrics, and then obviously through the offer process and everything that we do generally fairly well as contingent recruiters in terms of offer management and counter offer management, and bringing the search to a close. And then there's a piece in the project that most contingent recruiters don't do, and that's a retrospective at the end. So at the end of the project, I'll get all of the people that have been involved in it together, and we'll carry out, well, in tech, they call it a retrospective. In oil and gas, they call it lessons learned, call it whatever you want, a feedback session. And let's go over, what did we do well? What didn't go so well? What should we do differently next time? And who else in the business can benefit from this way of working? And when's the next project starting?
That's a really, really, really attractive way to work, I would say. That's my evaluation of it. And I don't know if it's because you're very, very good at selling it, or it's but it's just from listening to, because the thing is that, like what you mentioned, there is multiple ways, channels of, you have to have an omni-channel approach when you're dealing with candidates, right? A lot of the time, people are not going to want to speak to you unless you pick up the phone. That's part of life. And so if you're going to send them a LinkedIn message and then an email, and then even if you get their telephone number, you send them a WhatsApp message and then a text message, then you've contacted that person 4 times. But like what you say, if you've got a telephone number, you can pick up that phone on day one. You've saved yourself having to do those things, and you've got the yes or no. You've got the yes or no there. So that's kind of like, even if someone is not interested in doing retained search, I think there's something that they've learned from the process that you have laid out for us, that they can take away. But
Good.
I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to do it after, the conversation that we've had today. I feel quite excited about, speaking to more of my clients about
Good.
this. And my
Good.
mind's going because I'm thinking that actually, like from a recruitment director's perspective, this is a really, really good way of building a business because you could have, let's just say, this is just me spitballing here. You might tell me that I'm completely wrong, but if I had a couple of people who are really, really, really good at selling this as a solution, and then I had a delivery model behind it,
Yeah.
that could get to as far as it could get. And the thing is that I'm a big advocate of 360 because I feel like if you are looking for a recruitment career, you should know how to do both because markets go up and down and you're going to be valuable in any market, right? So I'm kind of contradicting my ethics when I say that, but I'm sure that there's a way that you could, bring those people at the beginning, they're doing delivery, then, if they've got the option to come over and do so, because you can't live their life for them. I have a lot of people I speak to, this is completely off subject, but a lot of people I speak to, they say, I only want to do delivery. And I'll have that initial conversation and I'll say, look, I think you might want to look at doing 360 because this happens and that happens in these markets and these markets. I'm talking to you as an old man here now, and I've seen loads of stuff going on, right? And then sometimes they say, yeah, listen, I understand that, but I'm not interested, Jeff. Just get me what I fucking asked you to get me. I'm not here for advice. I'm here for a job. And that's fine, and there's loads of companies that I deal with that operate that delivery model or business development model. So, there's a place for everyone. But yeah, I know, from my perspective, there's clients that I speak to that I'm trying to find ways for them to grow outside of that 360 model because it's just so bloody hard to find good quality 360 recruiters. And this is something now that I can speak to my clients about and obviously send them your way to know a lot more than what I do. Okay, so I feel like we know now at this point how we could go about pitching people from a cold perspective and from a existing client perspective. Good. What it would require to actually fulfill the project, which is not too dissimilar. You're just kind of showing your work is the only side of, that I would say that's different from that perspective. So really and truly, I'll just say, is there any top tips that you can give somebody, just short little snippets of, this is going to help you?
I think the biggest message that I want to give at this stage is there's a really nice quote that I love by a lady called Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said, if you believe that your product or service solves a genuine need, then it is your obligation to sell it. And that's how I feel. And I have experienced retained search and how the people that come through our program feel. Once you understand the mechanics of what it does and how it solves the challenges that our customers face day after day, it becomes your duty to get out there and explain how it works and ask them for the opportunity to show them. And that's how I want to leave people with, really, that there is a way of working that clients are delighted by, and it's changed me beyond belief, not just as a professional, but as an individual and as a mother, as I said, and a friend and a daughter. And lots of our members say exactly the same thing. So don't be frightened and don't be misled into thinking that it's something that you're not going to be able to do, because it isn't. If you want to do it, then you can.
Well, that was beautiful. Thank you very much for that, Louise. So I'm sure that loads of people are going to have watched this now and want to know more about how they could go through your course properly.
Yeah.
So how would we be able to access the full training?
I guess the best thing to do is probably to go on our website, and my calendar and Jordan's calendar and Robin's calendar, we all work closely together. We're all very experienced search consultants and coaches in the program, and you get to work with all of us. Is on the website under the Talk to Us tab. So we offer totally free, no obligation, just a session with you, 45 minutes. So you get a real nice long time to talk to us about where you're up to, how you're feeling, what's going well for you, maybe what you're worried about. A lot of people are worried about retained, and just kind of offload all the thoughts that you have about it, and we'll just talk to you and find out whether we think it is a good thing for you to do, or whether you are going to be able to do it, and whether it would work in your market. And if you want to, we'll tell you more about the program and how it works, and show you around, and you can have a look at it.
Okay, well, look, I mean, I think that anyone listening to this now has got a really, really good reason to go and hit that talk to me button. I'd like to say thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything you'd like me to ask? No?
I'm just grateful to you, Jeff, for reaching out and inviting me. I feel privileged to be on a list of experts who I admire and respect. And thank you for allowing me to share, the nuggets that hopefully will help people on their journey, wherever they're up to. And yeah, good luck to you, and hopefully your retained work. And if you need any help, then give me a shout.
I would go nowhere else. I'm extremely grateful for your time, and thank you very, very much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Jeff.